General Elijah Marsh had testified before Congress more times than he could accurately count across a 31-year career. But the closed-door session that afternoon had run longer and hotter than most. 4 hours of pointed questions about a classified logistics failure in the Pacific Theater, delivered by senators who understood roughly a third of what they were asking about and demanded he answer as though they understood all of it. At 58, Marsh carried himself with the particular unhurried gravity of a man who had long ago stopped needing to prove anything to anyone in a room. His hair had gone fully silver at the temples, cropped close in the same regulation style he'd worn since West Point. He wore his testimony uniform, not combat fatigues, but the formal Army service uniform, dark blue with 4 silver stars gleaming on each shoulder, ribbons stacked in 4 precise rows across his chest, a uniform that told, to anyone who knew how to read it, the story of 3 decades spent making decisions that cost or saved thousands of lives. He gathered his materials from the witness table with the same economical, practiced motion he'd use securing a field pack, a slim leather portfolio holding his prepared testimony, a secure tablet, and a single sealed manila envelope marked, in small block letters along the flap, "Classified, Eyes Only, Joint Staff, J2. "You held the line in there, sir." His aide, Major Priya Anand, fell into step beside him as they crossed the marble corridor outside the hearing room, her own arms full of binders. Senator Holbrook was fishing for a headline the whole time. "Holbrook always fishes," Marsh said, his voice a low, unhurried baritone that had commanded rooms far larger and far angrier than a Senate hearing room. "The trick is not giving him bait shaped like an answer." Priya allowed herself a tired smile. "Car's waiting at the east entrance, sir. Should have you back at the Pentagon in 20 minutes. "Cancel it." Marsh checked his watch. "I'm going to walk to the hotel instead. It's a mile, maybe a mile and a quarter. I could use the air after that room." Priya's expression flickered with the particular professional concern of an aide who had spent 4 years managing precisely this kind of stubborn habit. "Sir, it's already dark, and it's 28 degrees out. I can have the detail bring the sedan around in 90 seconds. "I've spent 6 hours breathing recycled hearing room air, Major. A mile in the cold will do me more good than a car ever could." He tucked the portfolio under his arm. "I'll see you at 0600 for the briefing." "Yes, sir." She hesitated a beat longer than protocol strictly required, then let it go, because in 4 years she had learned exactly which of the general's habits were worth arguing about, and this, his refusal to be chauffeured everywhere, his insistence on occasionally simply being a man walking somewhere on his own 2 feet, was not one of them. Marsh pushed through the heavy glass doors into the biting December evening, alone. No security detail trailing behind him, no aide murmuring updates in his ear, no reporters calling out questions. For the first time in longer than he could easily remember, General Elijah Marsh was simply a man taking a walk. He had no idea how dangerous that was about to become. The streets near the Capitol thinned out fast once you moved a few blocks past the government buildings. Row houses replacing marble facades, the hum of metro trains fading behind him, street lamps casting warm amber pools against the early dark. Marsh walked at a steady, even pace, the portfolio tucked under one arm, his mind still partly back in that hearing room, replaying the exact phrasing Holbrook had used on his second round of questions, turning it over the way he turned over any exchange that hadn't gone exactly according to plan. He crossed at the corner of Independence and 3rd, the pedestrian signal flashing its bright walk command, and as he stepped onto the far curb, the ordinary evening noise, a distant siren 2 streets over, tires hissing on cold asphalt, was cut through by the sudden, aggressive rev of an engine accelerating too fast for a quiet residential block. He didn't turn immediately. 3 decades of moving through cities all over the world had taught him not to react to every engine noise. But this one didn't fade. It grew louder, closing the distance behind him with clear intent. He glanced back over his left shoulder. A Metropolitan police cruiser was rolling slow along the street, keeping pace with his stride, hanging just at the edge of his peripheral vision. Something cold and familiar tightened in his chest, a response no rank, no uniform, and no chest full of ribbons had ever fully managed to erase. He understood, with the particular clarity of a man who had lived exactly this calculation more times across his life than he cared to count, that in the dim residential lighting, the officers in that cruiser couldn't see 4 silver stars. They could only see a tall, broad-shouldered black man in a dark coat walking alone at night. Just a patrol, he told himself, keeping his pace even, his gaze forward. Standard patrol. He reached the middle of the block, a stretch shadowed between a darkened church and a parking structure. The cruiser's siren gave its short, sharp chirp. The street exploded into a wash of red and blue. The cruiser swung forward at an angle, blocking the sidewalk ahead of him, and a spotlight mounted on the door pillars snapped on, catching him full in the face with a beam bright enough to blind. He stopped, squinting against the glare, his grip tightening around the leather portfolio. The driver's door kicked open. "Stop right there! Keep your hands where I can see them!" Marsh stood perfectly still, his trained mind already running the scenario the way he'd run 100 tactical assessments. A young officer's voice, pitched high with adrenaline, the particular edge of a man expecting resistance before any had been offered. He kept his tone level, deliberately calm, deliberately non-threatening. "Evening, officer. Is there a problem?" Officer Cole Denny stepped out from behind the spotlight's glare. Young, maybe 26, a tight buzz cut, his jaw set with the rigid tension of someone running on pure instinct rather than training. His hand rested, not quite on his weapon, but close enough to it that the intent was unmistakable. "I said hands visible. Drop the bag." "This portfolio contains sensitive government materials," Marsh said, keeping his hands raised and open at shoulder height, deliberately not lowering the portfolio to the ground. "I'm fully willing to cooperate, officer, but I'm not setting classified material down on wet concrete." "I'm not asking twice. Drop it." From the passenger side, a second officer emerged, older, heavier, moving with the same tightly wound posture as his partner. Officer Ray Petrosky unclipped his radio, eyes scanning Marsh up and down with open suspicion. "We got a call 10 minutes ago," Petrosky said. "Armed robbery, convenience store on H Street." Suspect description: tall black male, dark coat, carrying a bag. You match. Marsh felt something cold and disbelieving settle in his chest. Tall black male, dark coat. The most dangerously generic description available in the entire vocabulary of American law enforcement. He was wearing the formal service uniform of a 4-star general in the United States Army. He was carrying a government-issue leather portfolio, not a duffel bag stuffed with stolen cash. But under the aggressive wash of the spotlight, the particulars of rank insignia and ribbon rows had apparently evaporated entirely. He was, to Denny and Petrosky, simply a silhouette that fit a radio call. "Officers," Marsh said, dropping his voice into the same register he used addressing rooms of admirals and senators. "I understand you're responding to a call, but you are making a serious error. I've spent the last 6 hours testifying before the Senate Armed Services Committee 3 blocks from here. I'm walking to my hotel." "Yeah," Denny said, taking 2 steps closer. "Everybody's coming from somewhere. Put the bag down, turn around, hands behind your head." The street seemed to hold its breath. Part 2. The Portfolio. Marsh didn't panic. Panic had never once solved a tactical problem in 31 years, and he wasn't about to let it start now. He lowered his left hand slowly, deliberately, and set the leather portfolio gently on the cold sidewalk at his feet, then raised both hands back to shoulder height, palms open. My hands are visible. I'm unarmed. I'm carrying federal identification in my breast pocket. If you allow me to reach for it, this resolves in under a minute. Petrosky stepped forward, pulling a heavy flashlight from his belt. You don't reach for anything. Turn around, face the wall. Officer, listen carefully. Marsh's voice remained tight, but perfectly controlled. My name is Elijah Marsh. I am a 4-star general in the United States Army, currently serving as Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That portfolio contains classified materials from a closed congressional hearing. I strongly recommend you de-escalate and allow me to produce my credentials. Denny let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. 4-star general, sure, and I'm the Secretary of Defense. Turn around, now. The dismissal landed harder than the cold. It didn't matter how precisely he articulated the words or how steady he kept his voice. In their eyes, he was already something else entirely, and no combination of syllables was going to talk his way out of what they'd already decided he was. I'm not going to turn around, Marsh said, planting his feet. He was prepared to comply with a lawful order, but the indignity of being pressed face first against a wall over an impossibly vague description crossed a line 31 years of earned dignity would not let him quietly cross. I'll stand right here. You can search me from the front. I will not be treated like a fleeing suspect. He's refusing a lawful order, Denny shouted, and the space between them collapsed. Denny lunged, grabbing 2 fistfuls of Marsh's wool coat and spinning him hard toward the cruiser, his shoulders slamming into the cold metal of the hood. Hands behind your back, Petrosky barked, wrenching Marsh's left arm upward with sharp, practiced force. You are making a catastrophic error, Marsh grunted, his cheek pressed against the freezing hood, the sharp smell of hot engine oil filling his nose. Check my breast pocket. My identification is right there. Shut up, Denny snapped, pressing a forearm into the back of Marsh's neck. Stop resisting. I am not resisting. Marsh's voice finally rose, carrying down the empty street with the same command presence he'd used addressing formations of 10,000 soldiers. I am entirely compliant. You are currently assaulting a general officer of the United States Army. Petrosky began a rough, invasive pat-down, hands dragging across Marsh's coat, his waistband, down each leg. The indignity of it was suffocating. Marsh closed his eyes, focused on the slow, deliberate rhythm of his own breathing, the same discipline he'd once used to hold steady through incoming mortar fire on a forward operating base half a world away. He's clean, Petrosky muttered. No weapon. Check the bag. Do not open that portfolio. Marsh's voice, muffled against the hood, carried a chilling intensity that cut through the noise of the street. Those are classified materials. You have no warrant and no probable cause. Incident to detainment, Petrosky said dismissively, and Marsh heard the soft click of the portfolio's clasp being popped open. A wave of pure, disciplined fury moved through him. Not the reaction of a man losing control, but the cold clarity of a man watching, in real time, exactly the kind of rights violation he had spent 3 decades in uniform swearing to defend against, being committed against him personally, on a quiet residential street 4 blocks from the Capitol. What the hell is this? Petrosky's voice drifted over, suddenly confused. Marsh turned his head slightly, straining to see. Petrosky was shining his flashlight into the open portfolio. Inside were not stolen goods. Inside were tabbed government folders, and on top of them, the sealed manila envelope, its flap stamped in bold block letters. Joint Chiefs of Staff, classified, eyes only. Petrosky went very still. "Denny," he said, his voice suddenly stripped of its earlier bravado. "Hold on a second." "What, you find something?" Petrosky reached into the front pocket of Marsh's coat, patted it down, found nothing, then reached inside the breast pocket of the dress uniform jacket. He pulled out a leather credentials wallet and flipped it open. Behind the clear plastic window sat Marsh's Department of Defense identification, his photograph, the seal of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and beneath it, in unambiguous bold print, his rank and title. Petrosky looked at the ID card, then at the folders in the portfolio, then at the man currently pinned across the hood of his own cruiser. The street went very quiet. The lights kept flashing red and blue against the church wall, but the frantic energy of the last 90 seconds had drained away entirely. "Denny." Petrosky's voice had gone thin. "Get off him. Get off him right now." "What's your problem, Ray? He's refusing a—" "Shut your mouth and get off him." Petrosky physically grabbed his partner's shoulder and yanked him back, holding up the credentials wallet so the spotlight caught it. Look at what you just did." Denny squinted at the card, the seal, the bold rank designation, 4 stars, and the comprehension hit him like a physical blow. The adrenaline drained out of his posture all at once, replaced by a hollow, sickening realization. He stumbled back a step, suddenly looking very young inside his tactical vest. Marsh didn't move right away. He remained leaning against the cruiser's hood, drawing one long, slow breath of freezing air, his shoulder throbbing where Denny had wrenched it. He pushed himself upright to his full height, didn't rub the shoulder, didn't brush the dust from his uniform. He simply extended his right hand toward Petrosky. "My credentials, officer." Petrosky scrambled the wallet back into Marsh's hand, stammering. "Sir, General, sir, I don't want to hear it yet." Marsh's voice had dropped into something eerily calm, carrying the quiet, gathering weight of a storm still building offshore. He knelt, retrieved the manila envelope from where it had fallen half out of the portfolio, and examined the broken seal on its flap. He stood, and the temperature on the street seemed to drop another 10 degrees. "Officer Denny." He read the name off the young man's chest plate. "Do you understand what that envelope is?" Denny couldn't meet his eyes. "No, sir." "That is a classified briefing document from a closed session of the Senate Armed Services Committee, sealed under a national security designation. By opening my portfolio without a warrant, without probable cause, and without my consent, you have not only violated my Fourth Amendment rights, you have illegally accessed protected federal material." "We had a description," Denny said, but the fight had entirely left his voice. "Tall, black male, dark coat." "A generic physical description is not a warrant to suspend the Constitution, officer." Marsh took a step forward, closing the distance, and the physical dominance Denny had exerted minutes earlier inverted completely. "I was walking down a well-lit street, at a normal pace, in the uniform of a general officer. You had no specific, articulable suspicion that I was engaged in any criminal activity. You had a profile, and you filled in the blanks with an assumption." "Sir, please." Petrosky's voice had gone pleading. "It was a stressful call, armed suspect. We reacted." "You reacted to a phantom," Marsh said. He pulled a phone from his coat pocket, thumb hovering over the screen. "Call your shift commander. Tell them the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff requires their immediate presence at this intersection, and tell them to bring someone from Internal Affairs." If you're already gripping the edge of your seat, this is the moment to hit like and subscribe, because what happens over the next 20 minutes turns this from one bad stop into something that reaches the floor of Congress. Part 3. The Precinct Commander. Within 14 minutes, the flashing lights of Denny and Petrosky's cruiser were joined by two unmarked government sedans and a black SUV bearing Pentagon plates. The quiet residential block transformed into a staging ground of hushed, urgent activity. Precinct Commander Vaughn Otley arrived first, stepping out of his own cruiser with the particular brisk authority of a man accustomed to managing municipal incidents, and felt that authority evaporate the instant he took in the scene. His two officers, standing rigid beside their vehicle, and General Elijah Marsh standing a few feet away, uniform still immaculate despite the cold, radiating a silent and entirely unhurried fury that Otley recognized immediately as considerably more dangerous than shouting would have been. "General Marsh," Otley extended a hand. "Commander Vaughn Otley, I cannot express how sorry I am for this unacceptable misunderstanding." Marsh didn't take the hand. He kept his grip on the portfolio's handle. Otley lowered his arm, clearing his throat. "Commander," Marsh said, his tone even and formal, "are your officers equipped with body-worn cameras?" "Yes, sir. Standard issue." "Active for the duration of this encounter?" Otley glanced at Petrosky, who gave a miserable nod. "Yes, sir." "I'm formally requesting that footage from both officers be secured immediately, uploaded with restricted access, and the physical hardware turned over to my staff to preserve chain of custody." Otley bristled slightly, an old reflex. "Sir, procedure typically has our Internal Affairs Division conduct the initial—" "Do not lecture me on procedure, Commander." Marsh's voice dropped to a dangerous, silken quiet. "Your officers detained me without reasonable suspicion. They committed battery under color of law. They illegally searched classified federal documents. This is no longer a municipal matter." Otley swallowed, understanding, with dawning horror, exactly how large the disaster his men had triggered actually was. "Understood, sir. We'll cooperate fully." He turned to his officers. "Hand over the cameras, now." As his staff collected the equipment, Marsh turned his full attention on the commander. "Tell me, Commander Otley, does this precinct operate under any consent decree stemming from a prior Department of Justice review of stop and frisk practices?" Otley's face flushed. "We concluded a federal monitoring period 18 months ago, sir. We've implemented mandatory bias training since." "And yet," Marsh said, "a decorated officer of the United States Army, in full-dress uniform, walking away from a congressional hearing, was presumed to be a fleeing armed robber on the strength of a description that would fit roughly 40% of the men in this city. Your reforms, Commander, appear to be cosmetic." "Sir, Officer Denny is young. He's a rookie. He got overzealous under pressure. Do not insult my intelligence by blaming this on youth," Marsh said. "Officer Petrosky is a 14-year veteran. He facilitated the assault. He initiated the illegal search. This isn't one overzealous rookie's mistake. This is an institutional pattern in which my presence on a public sidewalk registered, instantly and without evidence, as inherent threat." He picked up the portfolio, the broken clasp catching the cruiser's spotlight. "4 hours ago, Commander, I was testifying before the Senate about troop readiness, about the systems this country relies on to project strength and stability abroad. Tomorrow, I will be filing a formal complaint with your department's Internal Affairs Division, with the D.C. Metropolitan Police Board, and with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. I will personally ensure the body camera footage becomes part of that record." Otley looked as though the ground had opened beneath him. "General, please, we can handle this internally. There will be discipline, suspensions. You have my word." "Your word, Commander, is compromised by the badge you're currently wearing. Marsh turned to the two agents from his own security detail who had arrived moments earlier. "Escort me back to my hotel. I have paperwork to draft tonight." He walked away down the street, flanked by his own people, without looking back at the flashing lights or the two officers standing frozen beside their cruiser. His shoulders still burned with a dull, insistent ache, a physical reminder of a vulnerability that no rank, no uniform, and no chest full of ribbons had ever fully managed to outrun. Part 4. The Leak. The hotel suite was quiet, lit only by the amber wash of the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. Marsh stood by the glass with a tumbler of bourbon in his right hand, his left arm resting in an improvised sling made from a hotel towel, an ice pack pressed against his throbbing shoulder. The adrenaline that had carried him through the confrontation had long since drained away, leaving behind a deep, bone-level exhaustion. His mind, though, was still working with the same cold precision that had carried him through 3 decades of high-stakes decision-making. The door clicked open. Major Priya Anand strode in, followed by Colonel Desmond Cruz, the Joint Staff's Director of Public Affairs. Both looked as though they hadn't slept in days, though barely 2 hours had passed. "The FBI Washington field office has custody of the body cameras, sir," Priya said, dropping a folder onto the table. "I've watched the footage twice." Her professional composure cracked briefly. "It's sickening, sir. The way they spoke to you, the physical force. It's indefensible." "Indefensible in a court of law, perhaps," Marsh said, taking a slow sip of the bourbon. "But we don't only litigate in courtrooms, Priya. We litigate in the court of public opinion, and out there, a badge writes its own rules more often than it should." Cruz looked up from his phone, his expression grim. "You're right about that, sir, and we've got a problem developing fast. The local police union caught wind of the incident before we'd even finished securing the footage. Their president, a man named Frank Oduya, leaked a preliminary account to a friendly reporter at the Capitol Ledger. They're set to publish an exclusive online piece at 6 a.m. Marsh set his glass down. "What's the narrative?" "That you were combative and uncooperative during a lawful investigatory stop of a suspect matching an armed robbery description. That you refused to identify yourself and attempted to use your rank to intimidate working officers doing their jobs. They're painting you as the aggressor and Denny and Petrosky as victims of an overreaching bureaucrat." Priya's hand came down flat on the table. "That's a complete fabrication. The footage proves it." "Of course it's a fabrication," Marsh said, his voice devoid of surprise. "It's a standard tactical maneuver. Muddy the water before the truth gets its boots on. If they establish that I was combative, an egregious rights violation becomes a messy he-said, she-said political story instead. Half the country will side with the badge, regardless of the facts." "What do you want us to do, sir?" Cruz asked. "I can draft a statement. Threaten the Ledger with legal action if they run it." "No." Marsh crossed to the side table where his portfolio sat, its brass clasp still bent from the illegal search. He traced the damaged metal with his thumb, feeling a cold, disciplined fury settle into place. "We don't threaten. We don't play defense. Get me the Secretary of Defense on the secure line." Within 90 seconds, the encrypted phone on the desk chimed. Marsh answered, putting it on speaker. "Elijah." Secretary of Defense Aaron Kessler's voice came through, grave and tired. "I was briefed 20 minutes ago. I've seen the footage. Are you hurt?" A strained shoulder, nothing requiring hospitalization. "The indignity requires a response, Aaron. The local police union is preparing to leak a fabricated narrative to the press by 6 a.m. They intend to turn this into a political circus before the truth is fully on the record. The Department of Justice is already opening a civil rights inquiry into the precinct," Kessler said. I confirmed it myself 20 minutes ago. That's the appropriate administrative response, Marsh said. It is not, on its own, sufficient. This cannot become a quiet investigation that resolves in a fine and a training memo 18 months from now. Tomorrow morning, the House Armed Services Committee reconvenes for a follow-up session on force readiness. I intend to request unanimous consent to enter the unredacted body camera footage into the congressional record. There was a long silence on the line. That's highly unorthodox, Elijah. Using yourself as testimony in an unrelated hearing, it will draw immediate objection. Let them object, Marsh said, his voice ringing with certainty. Let them explain, on the record, in front of cameras, why the assault of a sitting general officer by municipal police is irrelevant to a hearing about the readiness and treatment of this country's service members. If we handle this quietly, behind closed doors, we become complicit in exactly the system that allowed it to happen. Kessler exhaled heavily. The fallout will dominate the news cycle for weeks. Then let it dominate, Marsh said. Because if a 4-star general can be thrown against the hood of a car for the crime of walking down a public sidewalk, I want the country to sit with the question of what that means for every young soldier who doesn't have 4 stars on his shoulder to fall back on. Do it, Kessler said finally. Full support from this office. Tear it open. The line clicked dead. Marsh looked at his 2 staff members. Priya, I need a formal request drafted for tomorrow's committee session by 0500, citing the incident and its direct relevance to force treatment and morale. Desmond, prepare the unedited footage for release. The moment I submit it to the committee, you release it simultaneously to every major outlet covering the hearing, including the Ledger. We extinguish their fabrication before it has a chance to spread. Priya was already opening her laptop. I'll have the legislative liaison team on a call within the hour, sir. Cruz allowed himself a small, grim smile. I'll have the release cued and ready to fire the second you give the word. Marsh sat down at the head of the table, ignoring the deep ache in his shoulder, and pulled a legal pad toward him. Denny and Petrosky had believed they were stopping an anonymous man on a dark street. They had no idea they had just handed the second highest-ranking military officer in the United States exactly the instrument he needed to force a national reckoning. Part 5. The Hearing. The morning outside the Rayburn building was electric. The Capitol Ledger had run its story at 6 a.m. sharp under the headline, Generals Clash with Police Raises Questions of Special Treatment, heavily implying that Marsh had been combative and had demanded preferential handling during a legitimate robbery investigation. By 9, a sea of news vans and reporters had swallowed the sidewalk surrounding the building, the political press corps sensing the shape of a scandal involving one of the country's most respected military officers. When Marsh's motorcade pulled up, the press surged forward, cameras flashing, shouted questions overlapping into noise. He stepped out in his full dress uniform, expression a mask of calm, impenetrable resolve, and walked up the steps without acknowledging a single question, flanked by Priya, Cruz, and 2 members of his security detail. Inside the hearing room, the tension was suffocating. Committee Chair Representative Doris Holloway sat at the center of the raised dais, flanked by members from both parties. Opposing the morning's agenda was a contingent of committee staff who'd clearly read the Ledger piece and arrived believing Marsh was walking into the room already wounded. General Marsh, Chairwoman Holloway began once the session opened, the committee is aware of reports circulating this morning regarding an incident last night involving you and Metropolitan Police. Given the nature of these reports, several members have questioned whether it's appropriate for you to proceed with this morning's testimony. A ranking member from the opposing side stood. Madam Chair, given the account published this morning describing General Marsh as combative and uncooperative with officers conducting a lawful stop, We believe his continued testimony this morning presents a credibility concern the committee cannot simply ignore. A low murmur moved through the packed gallery. Marsh rose slowly. He did not rush. He adjusted his microphone, his gaze sweeping the dais before settling, steady, on the committee. Madam Chair, members of the committee, the ranking member is correct that an incident occurred last night, 4 blocks from this building. His characterization of it, however, drawn from an anonymously sourced newspaper account, is not merely inaccurate. It is a fabrication, designed specifically to obscure what actually happened. He nodded to Priya, who approached the clerk's desk and handed over a bound document along with a secure flash drive. I am formally requesting, under committee rule, that the unredacted, synchronized body camera footage from both officers involved in last night's stop be entered into the record as Exhibit A. The ranking member shot to his feet. Objection, Madam Chair. This is entirely outside the scope of this morning's agenda on force readiness. It is precisely within scope, Marsh said, his voice rising, filling the hearing room with the same command presence he'd used addressing formations of thousands. This committee has spent 3 sessions this year discussing service member morale, retention, and the conditions under which we ask this country's men and women to serve. Last night, I was walking home from testimony in this very building in the uniform of a general officer of the United States Army, carrying classified committee materials. I was stopped, blinded by a spotlight, and ordered to drop federal property onto the pavement. When I calmly offered my credentials, I was physically thrown against the hood of a police cruiser, my shoulder wrenched, and my sealed materials illegally searched without warrant or probable cause. He stepped out from behind the podium, walking toward the center of the well. The officers did not possess a warrant. They did not possess probable cause. They possessed a radio description matching a tall black man in a dark coat, and a presumption of guilt that 4 silver stars did nothing to dislodge until it was physically discovered in my breast pocket. Chairwoman Holloway stared at him, visibly shaken. The room had gone entirely silent, except for the low hum of the HVAC system. If a general officer of the United States Army cannot walk 4 blocks from a congressional hearing without being violently stripped of his constitutional protections, Marsh said, his voice dropping to a low, piercing register, then I would ask this committee what confidence it can honestly offer the young soldiers and airmen we ask to serve this country that the nation they defend will extend them the same basic presumption of dignity. He turned slightly toward Cruz, seated in the gallery. A nearly imperceptible nod passed between them. Cruz tapped a single key on his laptop. Across the country, in newsroom after newsroom, the footage landed. The raw, unedited video of General Elijah Marsh being thrown against a patrol car, his classified materials illegally searched under a spotlight on a quiet residential street, went out simultaneously to every outlet that had covered the hearing. I ask the committee to review the footage, Marsh said, returning to his seat, and I would ask the gentleman who questioned my credibility this morning to review it closely before he ever again characterizes what happened to me as a matter of special treatment. If this story has you sitting forward right now, hit like and subscribe, because what happens over the next 24 hours is where this stops being one man's bad night and becomes something the entire country has to reckon with. Part 6. The Reckoning. By the time the hearing recessed an hour later, the Ledger's narrative hadn't merely collapsed, it had been obliterated. The footage went viral within minutes, viewed by millions before the lunch hour, the public watching in real time as a calm, measured voice was met with shouted commands, as a decorated general was spun and pinned against a car hood, as 2 officers riffled through classified federal material without so much as a warrant. Frank Oduya, the police union president who'd leaked the original account, was cornered outside his own office by a crowd of reporters, unable to explain the gap between his version of events and the video now playing on every major network. By early afternoon, the mayor's office announced the immediate suspension of officers Denny and Petrosky, pending termination, along with the forced resignation of Commander Otley. The Attorney General appeared on national television that evening, announcing a full civil rights investigation into the Metropolitan Police Department's conduct, with a promise of federal charges where warranted. The committee members who had questioned Marsh's credibility that morning issued a joint, considerably more contrite statement within 24 hours. The hearing's original agenda, troop readiness, morale, and retention, found itself reframed, almost overnight, around a single, uncomfortable question. What does it mean for the country's fighting force when even its most senior, most decorated officers cannot walk a public street without their uniform and their rank being rendered invisible by a stranger's assumption? 3 weeks later, General Marsh walked out of the Rayburn building on a bright, clear afternoon, the December chill sharper than ever, but the sun cutting hard across the marble steps. The press pool was waiting again, cameras clicking, but there were no shouted accusations this time, only the quiet, steady documentation of a man who had taken a system built, in that moment, to diminish him, and turned it instead into the exact instrument that forced it to answer for itself. Priya walked beside him, allowing herself, for the first time in 3 weeks, something like a genuine smile. "You broke it open, sir." "Completely." Marsh adjusted the collar of his overcoat, careful of the shoulders still healing beneath it, and looked out over the flow of pedestrians and traffic moving along Independence Avenue, entirely unaware of what had unfolded 3 blocks away 3 weeks earlier. "We won one fight, Priya," he said quietly, his eyes carrying the particular, enduring resolve of a man who had spent 31 years understanding the difference between a battle and a war. "Out there, on those streets, this one isn't over. It's not close to over." He drew a slow breath of the cold December air. "Let's get back to the Pentagon," he said. "There's work still to do." The end.